everyone, and welcome back to the Social Work Bubble podcast. I'm your host, Laura, and I practice as a therapist in New York City. Today, we have a special guest, Catherine. She's an LCSW and a part of the Social Workers Rise podcast and the Rise directory. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so excited to be here.
Excited to have you. Can you speak on your journey to social work before we get started today?
Sure. Well, I'll do a brief overview because it's like over 10 years long. But I started social working in 2009 when I got my BSW from Cal State Long Beach. And then I got my MSW also from Cal State Long Beach in 2015. During this time, when I first started, I dabbled in a bunch of different types of positions. So I did policy work. I worked with older adults. I worked with children in an after-school program, affordable housing. And then after my MSW, I really just got into the groove of medical social work. Yeah. So I've been working in medical social work since 2015 in different settings such as hospice, palliative care, and now most recently in the hospital over here in Southern California.
Okay, how exciting.
Yeah. And and I got my license too.
Yes.
A couple years ago. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I know today we'll kind of be diving into clinical supervision, how we can even find a supervisor. Are you currently a supervisor, and what has that looked like for you?
Ironically, I am not a supervisor. So I really wanted to be, and I still do want to be, but it's just not. So I'll explain. So a year ago, probably over a year ago, when I was finally able and qualified to provide clinical supervision in California, I was looking into the process and I was really looking for a hub to go to with all of the resources and all of everything that I needed to know to be a clinical supervisor. I wanted the trainings, I wanted a community, and I also wanted a place to market my services, because once I spend this money and this time and this effort into being qualified to offer clinical supervision, how do people know that I'm available, right? So how do I get my name out there? Yeah. And so I'm not going to go spend all this money on if nobody knows that I exist, right?
Absolutely.
So I realized that didn't exist. There was no place like that. And I just started on this venture of providing the services, and it has morphed into the Rise directory. And I really want to be the hub for clinical supervisors and for new people who are just looking for more guidance on clinical supervision. So that is why I don't have the time or the energy to actually provide the clinical supervision. So I just defer to all of the experts in clinical supervision when people ask for trainings specifically on clinical supervision. So I can definitely talk about the field because I've spoken to many, many supervisors, and I've done a lot of research, probably more than most people have done.
Wonderful. So we'll definitely dive more into the Rise directory and kind of how we can use that. But before we do that, can you just kind of explain to the audience, like, first, what supervision is and why it's important for us to use it?
Yes. So clinical supervision is really vital to social work and all mental health practice, really. In 2020 alone, there were over 31,000 graduates of master's degrees. Wow. And yes, and this number just keeps on rising every single year. It keeps getting bigger. And 80% of those graduates plan to go on to pursue clinical licensure. So if you are part of those 80% of the people who get their MSW and want to be a clinical social worker, then you will be participating in clinical supervision. It is mandatory. There is no getting around it. So this is really the on-the-ground training for us as social workers, where we have the basic understanding of our field from our master's degree. And now we're building on that experience in real life with real clients, with real people's lives.
Yes.
So it is very important that we have that guidance and that leadership that we need in order to feel confident and to build on our skills and to just develop ourselves as professionals in a comfortable and safe space. So that is really, the main goal of clinical supervision is for the growth and development of our new social workers. It protects the welfare of our clients. It makes sure that we're practicing ethically. It really is able to monitor the supervisee and their performance and how they're implementing these therapeutic practices, and also empowering them to self-supervise their own work as they continue to go on through the process. The process can be anywhere between 1,500 hours in Florida or 5,700 hours in Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Louisiana. Okay.
I know. They're on it. I mean, it's a long time. But generally it's like most states is between 3,000 and 4,000 hours that you are working underneath a licensed professional.
Okay.
So it's a long time. And then additionally too, it really gives you practice with the clinical consultation part, because once we are, as on our own, I guess you will, in the field, then we still need to consult with other people and bounce ideas off of, and, see what do we do with this particular client? Like, what is going to be the best course of action? So it really has a lot of very important, goals, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I stayed on at my internship after grad school to continue to work there as a therapist, and in community mental health, which I've done another podcast episode on. It was a journey. But my supervisor wasn't really available to me that much to actually offer the supervision I needed. And I felt like a nuisance always pestering her saying, hey, I don't know what's going on. And I have all these high risk clients. And that's why, I love this idea of the RISE directory, because even though I was in an agency that provided me supervision, it was certainly not adequate to the level I needed. I was a new graduate, and it wasn't until I left that job a year later and am now working at a private practice where I'm actually feel like I'm honing my skills because I'm getting consistent and good supervision. So it kind of like messed me up at the beginning of my social work career because that kind of supervision and guidance was lacking.
Definitely. And that's a story that we hear so many times, unfortunately. And I'm glad that you got out of there.
Yes.
But some people just stay. They stay the whole time and they just have sucky supervision. And then when they get their hours and their licensure, they get into the field and they're like, well, what do I do now? Because nobody really ever taught them. And now they're just on their own. So I'm glad that you were able to get out of there and have a really good clinical supervision experience the second time around.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of see, obviously we're talking about social workers and how we need supervisors for a practice so we can grow. As an LMSW, because I want to also become an LCSW, that's also a part of required supervision. Is that right?
Yeah. Are you talking about getting pre-licensed to get the supervision, or
like to become a licensed clinical social worker?
So the process?
Yeah. So the process is part of that requirement is needing supervision.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So every state has a certain amount of hours that you have to be supervised. And depending on the state that you're in, you might have to get a pre-license, if you will, to your LCSW. So for example, here in California, you graduate with your master's and then you have to pass the law and ethics exam before you can register as a associate clinical social worker, or ACSW. And so once you have that, then that qualifies you for more jobs, especially with the government. So it shows that you are serious about getting your clinical supervision and that you have started the process and you're ready to just obtain those hours. And then once you have completed those hours, then you can apply to take the clinical test for your official LCSW. And I think it's the same a lot of times in other states where you get your you get your MSW, and then you can, get another license for your LMSW and then your LCSW. So yeah.
Yes.
A lot of letters going on.
A lot of letters. Yeah. That's just a separate bone I have to pick, is just how it's different in every state and how just the letters that we use are so different. So it can be hard for people to even understand what their path is and how to move forward. In your own experience in having a supervisor during your journey as a social worker, what have you noticed were maybe some of like the good, the bad? What did you find?
Yeah, so I had a really great supervisor, and I cannot speak, highly enough about her. It is good to be able to just have that space to process what you're going through and how you're feeling and your own emotions. So, for example, when I was going through my hours, I was working in hospice. And I was also raised by my grandmother when I was little. So I would experience a lot of transference and countertransference with our clients, in good and bad ways, right? I might say, oh, this reminds me of my grandmother. And maybe if the patient was being treated unfairly or unjustly or not getting the care that they needed at a certain facility, I might get extra passionate about that. And my supervisor would challenge me and say, Catherine, what is it about this particular client that has you feeling all riled up? Because you've had other clients at that same facility with the same treatment and you didn't get as passionate about them. So what is different about this particular person? And that was good, because then if that would have just gone unchecked, I could have just like run amok at this facility, and it could have put the relationship with the facility and my work at jeopardy. It could have endangered the patient, causing, some backlash, which we don't want that. So just having that extra person to kind of check you on your feelings and how you're coping, and really just hold you accountable to providing fair and equitable treatment to all your patients or clients.
Yeah, absolutely. We come in with a biased perspective, and we can easily get tunnel vision on a particular situation. So it's important to have something outside of ourselves to really hold us accountable and call us out and offer that support.
Yep, exactly. And I think I remember, the challenges that I had is, one, it felt like a nuisance having to meet every single week.
Yes.
And because, we're just so busy, and it takes a lot of time and energy to, especially if you're going in person, to go in person and to make that time. It takes half your day. But it's so necessary. Looking back, it is necessary to just take that break away from your clients, so you could just debrief and really just focus on you and learning for a small little portion of your week, because it's so easy to just let the week get by without really checking in with yourselves and just being mindful of how we're doing and how we're showing up. So even though it was a nuisance, it's a good nuisance.
Yes. Yeah. Helps us keep track of time too. If we have that weekly check-in, things can get out of hand. And I think that was the issue with two supervisors I had, was they were both overwhelmed. And so they felt like they couldn't find the time to be a supervisor. And because it is a lot of responsibility, ultimately, because I was practicing under them, it was their license on the line if I messed up somewhere. So it's a lot of pressure, but it's necessary.
Yeah, for sure. And we often don't hear the voices of the clinical supervisors themselves, because they have that extra stress. Like, oh my gosh, I'm trusting Catherine and Laura with my license. What are they doing out there? And I'm sure they also, they're just like us, just with a little bit more experience. And I'm sure they also want to be available, and they probably feel guilty about not being able to be more available for new supervisees, and they have their own systematic challenges that they're dealing with too, that they may not fill us in on all the time. So, having conversations in the back end with with more clinical supervisors. It's really opened my eyes up to the challenges and the need for support for those clinical supervisors so that they can, do exactly what we practice, right? Create boundaries, learn to say no.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In terms of becoming a supervisor, we've kind of established how someone can become a licensed clinical social worker. Are there additional things you need to do after that to actually supervise
Yes.
people?
Yeah. So, and then again, it all depends on your state. Nothing
Right.
is simple, right?
Never.
No, nothing is that simple. So, in some states, the supervisor must be registered and approved to
Mhm.
actually provide clinical supervision. And that's only in about 44% of states. Sometimes the supervisor must be a licensed clinical social worker in about half the states, 52% of states.
Mhm.
But you may also be able to obtain some hours underneath a person with a separate license. So for example, here in California, you can get a portion of your hours underneath an MFT or a counselor or a
Okay.
PsyD, but also a certain number is required to be under an LCSW.
Mhm.
So if that MFT is your supervisor at your job and you acquire all those hours and you're kind of left like, oh no, what do I do now? I have to find a
Right.
different supervisor. So that is another requirement. And then in some states, there is the requirement that the supervisor must have been practicing for a set amount of time after
Mhm.
they have become licensed. So in California, you must have your LCSW for 2 years before you can supervise. But in Michigan, I know that you can supervise right away. So
Okay.
there's not that time commitment. And then also in about 44% of states, you do need to provide some sort of proof of training, or there's like a
Mhm.
required training that you need to submit to your state. So
Okay.
it just depends on where you are.
It does, yeah. Similar to when people get a license and then they move and they have to like re-license in that state. Is that the same thing with supervision? So you have to like re-register as a supervisor in that specific state?
Exactly.
Okay.
Maybe you have to register. Some states don't
Oh, it's true.
require you
Maybe
to
you don't.
register. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
How fun. Keeps it interesting.
For sure. Yes.
Okay. Now, I mean, you kind of have those requirements to be a supervisor. Are there any like trainings or anything else that you have noticed is helpful in having a good supervisor?
So as far as trainings, I'm still delving into more of what the trainings are looking like. You
Hmm.
definitely take something, right?
Yeah.
Take some sort of training so that you understand, the full responsibility that is required of you as a clinical supervisor.
Mhm.
Additionally, you'll want to know how to track the hours, how to keep track of the clinical supervision. You need to do research with your own state as far as what
Mhm.
forms do you need and what forms do your supervisees need? Because although we would hope that our supervisees would be on top of it and know what is required of them, a lot of times they do not. So it's really on us as the clinical supervisors to make sure that we are that we have all of our T's crossed and I's
Mhm.
dotted when it comes to providing these supervision hours. So my first recommendation would be check out the requirements of your state, because maybe they have a specific training. I don't want you to go out and do all of the trainings and then realize you did the wrong ones.
Right.
So
Yes.
go there first, and then you can look for more trainings as well. Also, to the bonus with the Rise directory is you get some time, some dollars off of the telehealth certification institute. I think that's the name. I'll get you the
Oh,
exact
great.
name.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a little discount through them.
Oh, how wonderful.
Yeah.
Discount's always handy. Great.
Exactly.
Right. Now, kind of in that same line, we had the qualifications, we got some good training. What qualities outside of that really kind of make it or break if someone can be a supportive supervisor?
That's a really good question. So one, and you kind of mentioned this, is that they're available and approachable.
Yeah.
So we don't want to feel like we are a nuisance when we are just asking what is, what we're entitled to, right? We're entitled to an hour or 2 hours of clinical supervision. We shouldn't have to feel like a nuisance when we are asking about that. Or if there's a crisis and we need a phone call, we should feel confident that our clinical supervisor is available and open and willing to take that call to help us troubleshoot. Also, too, they need to be able to provide feedback and constructive criticism in a way that helps us grow and learn, and one that's not going to be demeaning or belittling.
Yeah.
They also should be able to model and to coach us on different therapeutic interventions that are going to be helpful for us to use with our clients, and just encourage overall professionalism and self-care. So if you see that they are burnt out and they're just expecting you to work, that doesn't signal a whole lot of balance or self-care or boundaries or, mental wellness. And I'm a firm believer that that is one of our professional duties, to learn how to set those boundaries and how to take care of ourselves for the well-being of our clients.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember too, like a lot of supervisees, and I did this at first, especially when I was an intern, was I did put a lot of expectation and pressure on my supervisor. Like they have to have it all together, but they're still a social worker. It's a stressful field. And I think you also need to come prepared and ready and be intentional with what you want to do with supervision, because it was my space, it wasn't just this person telling me what to do and everything. Like I had to bring the material and be prepared. And there was a situation, mostly when I was an intern and with my supervisor, where we got to the end of the semester and she was just like, don't know if I'm going to pass you. And it was a wild experience. And that's where I had to be really assertive and kind of be firm with her and say, I appreciate your feedback, but I feel like this would have been more helpful for me had it been months ago. So that way it could be a space for me to change. And I hadn't even changed how I practice. And then she was just like, wow, you're doing so great. That was a whole other thing. But I think a part of us too can get really stuck in the fact like, okay, this person is not the supportive supervisor I need them to be. And I think part of our role is also being assertive and using our own communication skills to address that if we need to, because supervisors can certainly change what they're doing to help us. It doesn't mean we just abandon ship and find someone else either.
It's true. Yeah. They're not mind readers.
Yes.
So we definitely have to have that uncomfortable conversation around, hey, do you think we could focus more on this? Or I'd like to learn more about that. Or even just address the elephant in the room. I feel like you're distracted, or I feel like I'm being a nuisance to you, something like that. I'm wondering, you mentioned that you had a supervisor who was not great and then one who was great. So what made them great? Like what made them, a good supervisor?
Yeah. Very intentional. I think it was very obvious that they wanted to be there. They were not distracted. I had their full attention. With my previous supervisor, she was always on the computer, and it was very much like, it just felt like my words weren't connecting with her, just passing through her ears. And now with my supervisor, there's also just like a big sense of empathy, like not just checking in professionally, still having boundaries, but really making sure do you feel balanced in just your general life? Like, do you feel like your caseload is too high? Because with my previous supervisor, I think I was at 54 clients, and she was continuing to ask me, can you fit this other person in? Can you fit this other person in? This supervisor now is recommending us to take days off for self-care, and kind of being assertive with us and saying, I think 36 is good for you. I think we're good there. So it's just the vibe, the intention is different, and you can tell that they're very much therapist centered just as much as they are client centered.
Definitely. So your story gives me and the listener hope that there are those good supervisors out there. There are those good work environments out there. And that reminds me of a time when I was struggling at work,
Mhm.
and I was in denial. My supervisor just said, I'm going to make this decision, because I would never admit, like,
Mhm.
take some of my clients off, or maybe reluctantly I would. And I don't recommend that. It's, be honest, just be
Yeah.
honest with yourself,
Mhm.
because you're only harming the clients, right?
Right.
They're the ones that aren't getting the services they need. But my supervisor, had to step up and just say, okay, I'm going to give 10 of your people to so-and-so, and I need you to get caught up on your documentation, and, take some time for yourself to just, like, figure out life.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes we just have those hard times,
Mhm.
life happens.
Yeah. It's just needing that person outside of us to say, pause, like check in, what's going on? Because a lot of times we will just get so caught up in the work and caught up in clients and wanting to be the support for them that we kind of lose ourselves in it.
Yep. Yep.
Mhm.
So true. So true.
Okay. Now tell us more about the RISE directory, because in speaking about all of these, different kinds of supervisors, different qualities, seems like RISE directory has really streamlined this process for being able to find a supervisor.
Yes, definitely. That is our goal. So the RISE directory is a national directory of clinical supervisors for social workers.
Mhm.
So it is free to browse for anybody. So if you are needing a clinical supervisor, go on there. You can search by your state, and then you could find who is available in your area. And then if you are a clinical supervisor, we welcome you. We are growing every single day. And you can either select a free profile where it'll just give your contact information, your beautiful headshot, and your
Mhm.
name. Or if you want more higher quality leads, so people know, what you're about and what you do, then you
Mhm.
can upgrade to a monthly or a yearly membership, where you can input all of your experience and get people to know you before they ever even schedule an interview with you.
Oh, wow.
So I'm really excited for it, because it gives clinical supervisors that space to really showcase all of their expertise and their knowledge and what they do and where they're at, and that they're available for these services.
Mhm.
In addition, the goal is really supporting the clinical supervisors themselves.
Yes.
And through our market research, we found that the highest need was really just peer consultation and
Oh, okay.
support.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we've been doing peer consultations every month on the third Wednesday of the month
Mhm.
since January of 2022. And it's been going really great. There's been a high demand for them. And the supervisors that attend just have so much great feedback, mostly that there is the space to have these conversations, because it
Mhm.
is such a niche area that you
Yes.
just need to talk to other people who just get it.
Mhm. Absolutely. Now, with peer consultation, for those who might not know, who are maybe students or totally new to the field, what does that look like and what does that mean?
So, peer consultation is where you can get together with other professionals who understand your job and the responsibilities and the ethics and the situations that go into being a clinical supervisor. And they're especially helpful when you are trying to brainstorm solutions to some problems that you have that you might be
Mhm.
stuck on, and also offering that support to other people too. So it's important, even legally, because
Mhm.
according to our code of ethics and legally, they're going to say, did you do what what others in your situation or in your profession would generally do? Did you do everything you possibly could? And so it's helpful having those people to
Mhm.
ask, am I missing something? Have I done everything that I possibly could?
Mhm.
And just getting that confirmation, like, yes, you have done everything. This is just a tough situation. Why don't you try X, Y, and Z?
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I like what you said too, that, I mean, this directory, obviously it's for, people to find a supervisor, but it's very much focus on supporting the supervisor themselves. Like you said earlier, a lot of the times they're kind of neglected. They have a lot of
Exactly.
pressure. They don't have a lot of support and resources. And I think when you're kind of an LCSW and you are a supervisor, you are very much on your own. You're the boss. Like you kind of take charge and do all that. And so it can feel very lonely. So being able to have that connection to other people and get feedback and just that emotional support is really powerful.
Exactly. Yeah. When I first started, with the podcast and on this journey, I thought, regular social workers were neglected, but oh my gosh, clinical supervisors, there is like hardly anything specifically for them. So I'm really grateful to be able to provide this resource. We're also building out our library of resources. We're doing workshops on a monthly, sometimes twice a month basis, just to improve their clinical skills, the business skills, marketing skills, everything that we need as clinical supervisors, but we're never really taught and we might not know, where else to go.
Okay. And it looks like, because I've been looking at the website earlier, that you do provide a lot of resources like supervision logs, things like that.
Yes, exactly. So we have those basic logs and contracts and forms that you need, but maybe you just don't have the time or the energy or the desire to create them from scratch. Yeah. So we have those templates for you. And again, with those are just general templates. Your state may have their own forms that they want you to fill out. Sometimes they have their own clinical supervision logs or their own contracts that they want you to use.
Okay. Wow. I mean, this is an incredible resource. I'm very excited if I ever need to use this, or I'll recommend it to other people because it's very exciting. It reminded me a lot of like Psychology Today, which my clients use to find me as a therapist. But you're right. Like this is a huge gap where it's kind of like, how do people know where to find a supervisor? So much of it's just like word of mouth or assumed that it's going to be at an agency that you're at. So this is a really good support for new and blossomed social workers. It's a word to use. Sure.
I like that. Blossomed.
There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Catherine, for coming on the podcast today. We learned so much about supervision, but also, how we can continue to grow as social workers and make sure that we are aligned with the supervisor that's supporting the work that we're doing. For people to continue to follow you, to follow Rise Directory, where can they find you?
Definitely. So we are on social media. We're on Instagram at Rise Directory. I also have a podcast, and that's the Social Workers Rise podcast. Woo-hoo. So yeah, we've been having a lot of fun with that for the past 2 years or so. And you can find us on Instagram at Social Workers Rise. I think so. I'm on LinkedIn, Catherine Moore. I'll give you my links.
Sure. Yeah. Everything will be in the description, so everyone can kind of find the information. They can use Rise Directory themselves. Thank you so much all for listening. Feel free to share your own thoughts, maybe your experiences with supervision or lack thereof on whatever platform you're listening on, and we'll see you next time.